2, 3.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Hangout. I'm really pleased that Gordon has agreed to come and join us in the Hangout tonight. You've probably seen Gordon around. He pops his head up at least once, if not twice a year, to talk particularly about the persecuted church. And it always just hits my heart really deeply. And I just couldn't resist the opportunity to ask Gordon to join us on the Hangout tonight to tell us more about the persecuted church and the things that he's hearing, share some of the stories, and find out why he's the one that has this passion and how he got it. So welcome, Gordon. Great to have you. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much, Michelle.
Gordon, you read a book when you were a teenager, and that seems to have started you on a journey. What was in the book that you read? Which book was it?
There was a book called Tortured for Christ, and it was a book written by a pastor who was imprisoned in Romania when it was a communist regime, and he was put in prison for a couple of spells, I think, but one of them was for about 3 years, and he was in solitary confinement for that period. And it was only when he managed to get out, he was released, and when he managed to leave the country, that he was able to tell his story of what had happened as a pastor in a prison in Romania. And it opened my eyes to the fact that there were Christians around the world who were struggling because of their faith. They were being persecuted for one reason or another, and I realized that being part of a worldwide church, there's such a lot that happens around the world that we need to be aware of, really.
From that story that you've heard about the Romanian pastor, what did it lead you to do? Because you were a teenager when you read this book, and what thought process did it set off, and what did it lead you to do?
Well, it was. I think I started reading other books as well, and one of the other stories that we read was a guy called Brother Andrew, and he was the one who was smuggling Bibles into communist countries, into Russia and into China. And I think I just kept my eye open for stories like that, to listen to what was going on in churches in different countries.
How have stories like that influenced your faith?
Well, sometimes when I'm going through a tough time, I think really the tough time I'm having is nothing like what other Christians are experiencing in other places around the world. So from a personal point of view, my tough time becomes such a small thing compared to what others are having to go through. And some of the things that they're having to go through are, life determining, really.
Mm-hmm. So can you share with us some of the stories and things that are coming out at the moment? So where would you say, in which countries are people facing the most persecution for being Christian?
Well, right at the moment, the situation for Christians in Iraq is very serious, and because of the Islamists have set up a republic across the borders of Iraq and Syria, and whenever they encounter Christians, the Christians are in fear of their life, really. they're certainly being chucked out of their houses, and they're having to find their way into places of refuge, and they're moving into places like Kurdistan, which is right up north of Iraq, to try and get away from the oppression, the persecution that comes their way when the Islamists take over their town. So that, I mean, that is a really, probably the most serious thing at the moment, I think.
How sure and reliable is the information that comes through? Because we hear a lot of stories on the media, there's lots of things on Twitter and Facebook, and you know, sometimes you get people saying, oh no, it's not as bad as that, yes it is as bad as that, no it's worse. What are reliable sources of information that really speak about the situation?
I think that's a good question, actually, Michelle, because it does concern me that if I'm to convey some information to other people, I need to know that what I'm saying is true. And so in the situation with Iraq, I've tended to go to Canon Andrew White and his accounts of what's going on. And that's what I convey.
Who is he?
Sorry?
Who is Canon Andrew White?
Canon Andrew White is called the Vicar of Baghdad, and he's an Englishman who became a vicar in Anglican Church in Baghdad in Iraq in 2003, and he's been there ever since, and he's seen what has happened to Christians in Iraq since that time, and he's the one who has been telling the Christian world really about what's happening to Christians in Iraq and the sort of stories that he's seen himself and the accounts that he's heard from his own people. And so when it comes to telling others about what's happening, I tend to use what he says because I feel I can trust his accounts.
And obviously, he's an individual. Does he use a particular organisation to spread what he's the information? Are there any? Which are the best organisations to refer to for this type of?
I mean, personally, I belong to, or I'm a rep for Christian Solidarity Worldwide, called CSW, and I rely on their sort of information that they provide on a regular, daily basis in terms of the countries that they work in and the information that they gather from around the world. And their role is really to try and influence governments to change what's happening in countries where Christians are persecuted by making it easier for people to have freedom of worship, really.
Behind the stories, these individuals, do they want their stories to be told? What do they want? The Christians that are speaking out and saying this is happening, that's happening. We know that they want political change, but why? Why? Terrible question, badly phrased. But what difference does it make by them knowing that we've heard?
I think you often what persecuted Christians seem to say most of all is that they need to know that people are praying for them, and I think they find that a very reassuring thing to know. Time and time again, you hear their story, and they say it's just so important that we know people are praying for us. But also, there are people who are in need of just general supplies and food and somewhere to live and blankets and particularly if they've been chucked out their homes. So there are some organizations that help them with getting stuff to them, really. And one of those organizations is Open Doors, which is the organization that Brother Andrew set up. And another organization is the Barnabas Fund, and they help Christians who are persecuted in sort of a material way as well as praying. But I think it's important to bring the situation to government level, so that governments can, through their contacts with these other governments, can try and persuade change to happen in those countries where it's possible.
Has there been change, or where are they? Have you seen an effect? Because we love praying. Yeah, we're good at that. I think Kingsland scores pretty highly on the praying. I've seen some really passionate prayers, and we fundamentally believe as Christians that God changes things. That God is a God who loves and cares. So, can you give us some examples of where Christians have been called to pray for the persecuted church, and where there has been real answer to prayer?
Well, I mean, if you go back to the story about the pastor in Romania, I mean, Romania is a changed country now, and there's a freedom of worship, and that's because there was a big change in Eastern Europe towards the end of the 80s, as the communist rule ceased, really, and each of these countries became were able to rule themselves. And so that massive change was, I guess, was part of, a lot of prayers people were making for Christians who were in underground churches across Eastern Europe and Russia. And the change has come about in an amazing way. And if you look at China now, I mean, in the time when Mao Zedong was in charge, and it was strict communist country, there was an underground church that was really under serious pressure. There was no openness about worshipping in communist China. And these days, the church in China is completely changed. I mean, there are still areas of the country where you have to be careful, but it's much more open, the ability to worship in China. And so, the numbers of Christians in China make it probably the biggest church in the world in terms of a country. There's so many who have come to Christ. So there is change that comes about in different countries.
Over time. I know I grew up with stories of churches being persecuted and having to meet in secret, and worries about secret police and meetings and things like that. And as a teenager, I always found those very exciting. And what I didn't appreciate was those were real people's lives. And though it was always sort of triumphed as well, under persecution, the church grows bigger and stronger, and that's very exciting. But actually, this is real people's lives. This is their day-to-day. And the impact of that, as I've heard you speaking at the church, has been really profound. That it isn't just a James Bond adventure film or some novel. This is real people's lives. Yeah, it really is, isn't it?
It is. I mean, there was a letter that came out from a pastor, a guy called Benem Irani, I think, in Iran, and it was a letter that came out recently, and in it he was saying that he would rather stay in prison in order to keep his faith in Christ than to be released and lose his faith. And when they're in prison, you tend to hear these stories of how much impact they have on other prisoners in those prisons as they are faithful to the Lord under tremendous pressure, but they because they're standing firm, they're influencing others for Christ. And there are some terrific stories that come out where people have really stood up for Christ. Obviously, you know, there will be those who will give up their faith maybe because of the pressure. But we pray for them all. I mean, you can't be judgmental for people who are really struggling and who are really being persecuted for what they believe.
What can we do as individuals? Obviously, praying, that's got to be top of our list. Quite interesting as we've been talking. I was just dwelling on the fact that last week I was doing a hangout with Mike Cook, and we were talking about the prayer chain at Kingsland. When someone has a real need, an emergency, they can get hold of Mike, and there's these people, 20 or so people around the church that will get in front of God and say, this person has a problem, has a crisis. And I guess you're the equivalent of Mike, but you're the international prayer chain. Is that right?
Well, I mean, prayer is vital, but I mean, we haven't set up a particular time to get together to pray for the international church. And I mean, it's one of those things. I suppose what concerns me is it's yet another event that people feel obliged they have to turn up to in an already busy life. But what we can do is we can pray individually in our own prayer times using all the resources that the various organizations give us. And they all have their prayer manuals and booklets which contain names of individuals who are in prison or who are suffering and who we need to pray for on a regular basis. So I'd encourage people to look at organizations like Open Doors and CSW and Barnabas and Release and see all the information that they provide. And there'll be something in one of those organizations that will touch your heart, and it will make you want to pray more and more for those people. And I mean, right at the moment, Michelle, there's one person who's on my mind, which really concerns me, and it's this lady in Pakistan, Asia Bibi, who has been in prison for 5 years, and because she was accused of blasphemy, and she was beaten and put in prison, and she had an appeal recently after 4 years, I think, and they still upheld the original court ruling that she had to die. And so she's back in prison. Now she has one more chance of appeal, which is with the Supreme Court in Pakistan. And her lawyers are preparing that now as we speak. And I think the appeal has to go in, if not now, pretty soon. And really we need to pray that, the government there changes its mind, or the court releases her, because nobody should, in any country in the world, be under sentence of death because of what they believe. And so for anybody watching this, please just take up Asia Bibi's case and pray for her.
Is there also some practical things that praying being very practical, but is there I know sometimes I get things and I write an email to my MP about things, and he's very good, he always responds. Are there things influences who influence government, who we should be speaking to as the ordinary man and woman.
Well, absolutely. I think the whole idea of petitions is helpful because it shows how much pressure or how much concern local people or people of that particular country have for somebody, and it puts pressure on the government. Writing to an MP is important. I was talking to the young people the other day, and we agreed to write a letter to Bob Russell and sign it about the case of Asia Bibi, and just to ask, what is our government doing to try and persuade Pakistan to change the situation for Christians over there? So yes, writing to MPs is important. Petitions are important. Just to make sure that people are aware and governments are aware that there is a concern about a particular person in need. I mean, that's how, I don't know, I spoke about a lady called Miriam Ibrahim from Sudan who was in prison earlier in the year. And that's how she was released, because there were so many petitions and requests for her release and letters and general pressure to try and get her release. And
yes, the story was across a lot of news channels and had a real high profile, didn't it?
It was a very high profile. And I think sometimes partly because there was an American connection there. Her husband was an American. And so when there's an American connection, you tend to get a lot more people sort of getting out there saying something needs to be done, and I think there was a lot of American pressure for her release.
Yes, I think so. But obviously, not everyone has the advantage of being married to someone from another country where the government will respond. So it comes back to us being aware of people outside of our own little world, doesn't it? And
yes,
the challenge like you've given us tonight to pray for Asia Bibi and for God to intervene there in a dramatic way.
Yes, we certainly need her to be released from prison and that death sentence to be changed. Yeah.
Gordon, thank you for challenging me, and I hope other people will be challenged when they watch this as well. Thank you for being the one that's listening out on behalf of Kingsland for the people that need prayer internationally and bringing that to us. And I just encourage you to keep on doing that, because we need to hear this stuff. We get far too into it. Thank you for having a heart to do that.
Thank you very much, Michelle. It's been a pleasure.
Gordon, presumably, if anyone wanders up to you in the cafe and to talk to you about this, you can point them in the right direction and tell them more.
Yeah, absolutely. And can I just say, there's a board up at the front of the church which has a lot of information about persecuted church, and we'll keep putting stuff up and changing that around. So you just need to go up to the front and read some of the information about the Christians in Iran who are in prison. You know, there's half a dozen pastors and a lot more other Christians who are in prison, and various other things that we've put up there just for people to take advantage of and make use of and pray for the people concerned.
Okay, so at Kingsland, that's a board. Is that on the blue screens on the left-hand side as you go into the worship area?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and we'll try and get a better lighting on it, I think.
Okay, noted. Thank you. I actually didn't realise that was there. It just shows how blind I can be when I come into the worship area. Too many people and not looking for that information. So I'm going to go and look for that, and I hope others will too.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, Michelle, we're a busy church, aren't we? I mean, there's such a lot of things that happen, and this is just one of those things that people can spend a little bit of time at just to get a bit of knowledge about what's going on.
Gordon, thank you so much for your time tonight. And I just, yeah, keep at it. It's fantastic stuff.
Okay. Thank you very much, Michelle.
So,